Good evening, everybody. It's 5:30. We'll go ahead and start the special meeting of the DuBois County Commissioners for December 7th. We'll start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'd like to join. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have a single order of business tonight, and Commissioner Hofstetter has been leading the charge on the regional sewer district study, so I'm going to let him introduce our guest tonight.
Okay, we started out with a need and completed a study. The study was completed by Clark Dietz, and tonight we have Mary Austin and Chris Gutkowski. Okay, here to read the findings of the study.
I want to first of all, I'm Mary Austin, and my cards are on the next to the sign-in sheet. And if you would like to take one, feel free to call me, email me, text me if y'all have any questions after today's meeting or any concerns. I'll be happy to help you as best I can. I will say that both my office line and my cell number are on there. The best way to reach me is from a cell number as opposed to the office line. Don't hesitate to use it. I want to thank you all for coming out. This is a project that I've been involved in, I guess, for about a little over 2 years now. But I'm very aware that the county has been looking at different options for a couple of different decades at this point on how to get sewer, or if it's feasible to get sewer to some of the outlying areas. So I'm excited to see that it's moving forward and that we have a study and have some feasible, realistic options for the county as they move forward. And noting that this study is a very kind of high level look at everything. So, feel free when we get the question and answers, ask whatever detailed questions you want. But understand that the details for each area would be worked out when we get to the point of actually taking sewer to that area. So the study looks at a 20-year plan. So it's a high-level conceptual look about feasibility as opposed to being at the design level at this point. And with that, I'll let Chris kind of run through the summary, and then we'll do questions.
Thank you, Mary. I'll just kind of step us through the main points of our study. Like I was introduced before, my name is Chris Gutkowski, and I was one of the lead engineers working on this project. So first off, I want to start off by kind of just laying the groundwork and giving a background so we can kind of see the justification for moving forward with this. So starting at the beginning, we have two ways of managing wastewater on a site-by-site basis. You have a conventional septic system, which is a private way of doing things, and then you have the public collection system. So those are the two ways of managing. The way to think about it is for a public collection system, once that pipe leaves the property, you pay a fee for some other entity to manage the flow and treatment of that wastewater. For a private septic system, everything remains on site and everything is the responsibility of the property owner. So that's two ways that wastewater is managed. But about 20% of the U.S. population is on a private septic system. So there is a time and place for a private septic and a public collection system. But being able to differentiate between the two and apply what's best for each property is on a case-by-case basis, and that's somewhat what we're trying to do with this effort. Typically, a private septic system lasts on the order of 20 to 30 years. It can last longer if it's properly maintained and it is functioning under ideal conditions. If it's not maintained, if it's built under poor conditions, it can last less than 20 years. And so the costs associated with a private septic system well, isn't, is more intermittent than a, public connection, those costs are usually much higher, several times, what a typical monthly payment would be for a public connection. So that's something to keep in mind, when you're kind of looking at the two options. Another thing is suitability. So this is a study that was done by IDEM of the lower East Fork and the White River. And I know this doesn't really cover all of Du Bois County, really just the northwest corner of the county. But what this does show is that the areas in red have typically one of these factors working against it. So that's not to say that a private septic system can't work in this area. It just requires some additional modifications, additional measures in order for it to properly operate. And what those additional measures typically mean are increased cost for installation, increased cost for maintenance. So, and then a high risk of failure at an earlier date. So while this study is unique, or is focused on just this watershed, this isn't unique to this area. It's something that, all throughout southern Indiana, this is kind of what you're facing, is that the soils, the geology, things like that are kind of working against the private septic system. So you have to take measures to kind of mitigate those impacts. As for the sanitary service areas, so the public service areas that you see here, there's actually 6 wastewater treatment plants all throughout Du Bois County. What we have shown in the various colors is the service areas. That doesn't mean every property in these colored areas is served by a public sewer. It just means that there's a network throughout this area that picks up a vast majority of the properties. So you can kind of see that they're typically focused on the big residential areas of the county, but there's only 45% of the county covered in a color. The remaining 55% has no options. So it really is a public or a private septic system is their only option. And that's ultimately what we're looking to do is try and fill that gap that's not covered by one of these colored areas. And so that's what the study was focusing on, is the areas outside of each of those shaded areas. And I'll talk about this map in a little more detail later in my presentation. Some additional statistics. So I have the population of Du Bois County shown here at a little over 42,000. If you want to get an idea of where that kind of fits with the treatment capacity of the overall county, if you just strip away all the commercial, all the industrial, all the institutional properties, and just look at residential homes, the wastewater treatment plant capacity of Du Bois County as a whole can treat about half of the residents in the county. Obviously, when you add in other things, that number goes down. We can kind of see that while there is wastewater treatment capacity in Du Bois County, it prevents us from just putting a sanitary pipe down every road and connecting every home. We just don't have the wastewater treatment plant capacity to be able to do that. And so those two improvements, the treatment capacity and the collection system, kind of need to work together. And that's what I'll kind of touch on as I move through my presentation. Another thing to note is that the population growth. What I have shown here is the last 120 years almost of population growth in Du Bois County. And really since about 1950, it's been fairly healthy, constant growth. So you can kind of see by this curve, it's followed a fairly constant trajectory. The thing we have projected here from various sources from the state and regional planning is that type of growth from here on out is actually considered accelerated growth for Du Bois County. Expected growth is supposed to be more stagnant, more slow, and that's for a number of factors, but one of those is the wastewater treatment plant capacity and collection system capacity of Du Bois County. Typically, you're going to have better conditions for growth when you have an ability to connect to a collection system. And so a project like the Mid-States Corridor, where you could have some potential growth associated with that, that's really going to benefit from a collection system that's in place. If it was to rely predominantly on septic systems, that would severely limit growth. But that's just one example of how if you have the infrastructure in place, it's easier for growth to maintain the trajectory that's been going on for the last 60, 70 years. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to maintain with this effort. It's not to expand it so we're growing at an exponential rate. It's just to maintain the same kind of growth trajectory that we've had for the last 60 years or so. So the next part of this presentation is just going to discuss how do we achieve the goals that we want to achieve. The same kind of growth rate, the same kind of service, but improve on the opportunities that we have out there. And so that's what I'll touch on now. The two options we have, essentially, when we're looking at the regional sewer district, is we can do a no action. That's obviously the lower cost option. That would obviously be no changes. But then, like we had discussed before, you're reaching your capacity of your collection systems and wastewater treatment plants, which really are better tailored for the cities that they serve. They're not really meant for the larger county as a whole. And so, so that's going to be restricted, as well as the environmental impacts. A failing septic system, while it might seem like it's a property owner's problem, if it's not addressed, it can quickly turn into a regional issue. And that's with you're essentially discharging wastewater then into receiving streams or waterways, parks, things like that, where that type of pollution you don't want to really get in contact with, because even if it isn't a firsthand direct contact with a human, animal to human infections can occur. And so that can be just more than just a single property issue. It can become a regional issue. What the regional sewer district looks to do is kind of establish a county-wide, similar to like a county highway authority, but a system where they would focus on those areas outside of the shaded wastewater treatment plant service areas, and just look at ways where we can implement improvements to benefit the community as a whole. And so that was one benefit. Funding is another. Typically, in order to pursue funding sources, it takes some form of government and some resources behind that. Typically, if you leave it up to local wastewater treatment plants, they can do a great job of serving their constituents. Reaching outside their boundaries becomes a lot more difficult. And so that regional sewer district just opens up additional avenues for funding sources. And then it allows for a strategy to be implemented. So looking at it from a county-wide perspective, as opposed to just a case-by-case basis. The cons are there's going to be a fee associated with that. There's resources that need to be had for infrastructure improvements, for operation and maintenance of infrastructure, and then administrative fees. And then a con is prioritized implementation. So it's not the goal. I mean, the goal would be to provide the best level of service to every property. That's just not feasible though in a realistic funding source and timeline manner. So there's going to be communities that see improvements before other communities, and so that kind of prioritized implementation can be seen somewhat as benefiting certain people before others, and so there is a trade-off associated with that. As for regional sewer district, the ultimate goal is to provide service, in this case, sanitary collection system, but to provide a service to a smaller community that doesn't have the resources to be able to install a full-fledged infrastructure project and be able to treat that collected wastewater. I had already mentioned the organization and the funding opportunities, but the versatile focus is key. I've talked a lot about collection systems. Technically, it doesn't have to be just collection systems. It can be a wastewater treatment plant. The thing to note, though, is to actually build and operate a wastewater treatment plant for smaller communities, and by small I mean a couple hundred, even as small as like 1,000 residents. is extremely difficult to permit, to build, and to run efficiently. And that's just because wastewater treatment plants, in a lot of ways, prefer a constant flow to be able to keep everything moving. So these larger regional points of treatment are the more efficient way of doing things. And since, like you saw before, we already have 6 wastewater treatment plants that are scattered all throughout the county. It doesn't really make sense to start adding more to that network. It's already, we already have decent coverage. It's getting the flow to those points. And that's ultimately what the biggest priority is going to be with this effort, is looking at infrastructure to convey flow rather than treat it. Another thing that this regional sewer district can look at is private treatment systems. So, while the projects that we've looked at are looking at communities with larger populations, and spending money in those communities are more efficient than trying to pick off a single property here or there. Those properties will likely maintain private septic systems for the foreseeable future, or maybe indefinitely, just because it doesn't make sense to run a single pipe for a single property. It's really a collective of properties that where the efficiencies are found, and where the biggest benefit can be realized. But that's not to say that the private treatment should be ignored, because it is a valuable part of the overall waste management of White County. So what we have shown here is the 15 communities that we've initially identified. This was just trying to start to develop a list of the larger communities that we could target and prioritize. And I'll kind of discuss some of these. Really, Hayesville is, we applied an evaluation matrix for each of these 15 communities, and we took a number of categories. Hayesville was one of those that checked off a lot of the boxes. Several other communities did as well. The unique thing with our evaluation system, well, it's not perfect, and it's not based on, it can be customized to any kind of preference. There was a lot of communities that kind of scored similar. Hayesville did separate itself, but once we start working our way down the list, that's when I'll have to go through reevaluations and things like that. But one of the ways to kind of improve efficiencies is start to lump some of those communities together, and if we can create a regional improvement that captures a few of those communities, that's where you're really going to realize your benefits. We looked at potential funding sources. Like I said, with a government entity that covers the county, it does open up some potential new funding sources that can be had to kind of look at either a pay-as-you-go program where you construct infrastructure as you have the funds, or debt services where you borrow or bond the infrastructure improvement and then pay through fees to pay down that debt. And then like Mary said, we're looking at 20+ years. So we're looking at not only the initial projects, but how you kind of propagate this to the various other communities, so that the improvements can be spread across as many of these residential areas as possible. So as for the strategy to implement this, so this is similar to what I showed earlier. We still have the 6 wastewater treatment plant service areas. What we have shown here is what we're terming 3 treatment areas. And by no means is this a final map that is defined boundaries, but it kind of gives you an idea of, okay, so we have Hayesville and Porterville just to the north. It probably makes sense to take that to Jasper. And so just looking at ways where we can kind of take those treatment plants and look at ways where we can implement infrastructure to bring larger areas into those wastewater treatment plant service areas. And so this kind of gives you an idea of how we might lay out the overall county as we look to expand the infrastructure into those areas that weren't previously covered by a sanitary collection system. For the formation and operation of, I'm not going to go into a lot of details about how a regional sewer district is formed. There are state regulations and guidelines that require certain tasks to be met, certain things to be submitted. So it is by no means just a program that you can flip a switch and it immediately goes into effect. There's public comments, bylaws, a voting board that needs to be formed. So there's a lot of steps that go into formation of something like this. But we have started to put together some of the information, and that's contained in our study about how the process gets started and what's needed in order to be able to progress through that process. So, I presented a lot of information, but ultimately it probably boils down to these basic questions of how does it affect me? And really it kind of is determined on where your property is located. If your property is located outside of one of the existing wastewater treatment plant service areas, what you can expect is some sort of fee assessment. Now that dollar amount hasn't been determined yet, so I don't have that number. But properties outside of the existing wastewater treatment plant service areas will be assessed a fee. And then an implementation of infrastructure improvements will take place, likely starting with Hayesville, and then kind of working through as funding allows. So what you can expect is if you're in one of those communities that gets a sanitary sewer collection system, you'll likely experience, what you'll have is the opportunity to connect onto that sewer when your septic system is in need of a major repair or replacement. So it's by no means okay, you have a sewer, now get off your private septic system and immediately tie in this sewer. It's when the opportunity arises, it likely becomes incentivized to connect on because replacing a private septic system is extremely costly versus the connection fee associated with connecting onto a public sanitary sewer. But that opportunity will be available to communities that have infrastructure in place for individual properties and communities that haven't yet received a public collection system. While your benefits aren't going to be the option of connecting onto a sewer, your benefits are more indirect, where additional areas of the county are brought online to a wastewater treatment plant service area, and so like I touched on previously, it'll help grow, it'll help property values. It'll in essence benefit the community or the county as a whole, even though you don't have that option yet to connect onto a public sewer. If you are inside one of the service areas for the existing wastewater treatment plant, while I can't say that you won't see any change, it will take a slightly different form. And what I mean by that is, so there's going to be agreements between the regional sewer district and each of the wastewater treatment plants to receive this additional flow. But that doesn't mean that the existing wastewater treatment plants won't necessarily need improvements, or there won't necessarily need to be infrastructure improvements associated with those new connection points on the edge of town. And so how each of those wastewater treatment plant service areas deals with those issues, it'll be on a local basis. But it is possible that you might see an infrastructure construction project in front of your house, or you might see an adjustment of service or rates or things like that. But that'll be directly from the local wastewater treatment plant service area. So I think that kind of covers the highlights of the study that we put together. So I guess we'll open it up to questions and just jump into discussion. Yeah.
If we have a wastewater plant and it comes through the area close to us, the town won't be forced to tap in, if they don't need to, right? There won't be fees assessed to the wastewater plant you already have.
If you're in an already served by wastewater treatment plant, yeah, that service fee is already being handled by the local wastewater.
I mean, you won't be forced to add an additional fee because it's regionalized.
No, basically, the intent is for whatever flow gets added to that treatment area. That intergovernmental agreement will include, cash payments, because essentially it's almost being treated as a new connection to the system. It's just on a larger scale because it includes,
It's the tap.
right.
Like Huntingburg, Jasper, their existing sewer system limits, the legal limits, not necessarily where they currently have infrastructure, but the legal limits that they have for their service area is not changing. Those entities aren't changing. They are completely separate from the regional sewer district. They're not being engulfed into the regional sewer district. So you have the regional sewer district that incorporates, can we flip back to that map with the service areas? So if you look at this hatched area, those are the existing infrastructure areas of the existing systems. The dark area is legally how much Huntingburg can grow, Huntingburg sewer can grow their system, right? So this is not changing. It will still be its own entity, its own board. They will make all their own decisions for the people that are currently on this system. Anything in the light pink, in the light blue, in the light green that currently doesn't have an option at all for sewer is not legally part of any of the existing systems. These are the areas that would become part of the regional sewer district. The regional sewer district would, as we are able to, they would put in collection system pipes in the ground to collect, say, for Hayesville, all through the town of Hayesville. And then the regional sewer district will construct a pipe that'll take all of Hayesville's flow to Jasper's treatment plant to be treated. And then the regional sewer district will have a binding legal agreement with Jasper that says for every, we plan to send you, 100,000 gallons a month. And for that, we will pay you this many dollars per 1,000 gallons you receive. And everything coming into Jasper will be flow monitored. And the regional sewer district will get a bill from Jasper, just like every resident in Jasper gets a bill from Jasper. And they're just another user for Jasper. So they're not becoming part of the regional sewer district. In essence, the regional sewer district is now a client to Jasper, a client to Huntingburg, a client to the program.
Who will maintain all the regional sewage lines?
The collection system and everything?
Yeah.
So, the regional sewer district itself, back in the last day where we talked about a formation of a district, will have to have its own board, its own maintenance, its own billing, all of those entities, just like Jasper has and Huntingburg has. The only difference is they won't have their own treatment plant. They could, there's just no need for them to build one when the regional sewer district pay the existing ones to treat the sewer. So they will have the same infrastructure theoretically. That's how it would be set up. Nothing in the way we are looking at setting up the legal entity of the regional sewer district restricts them from, as part of their interlocal agreement with Huntingburg, saying, we want to use your maintenance crews and we pay X fee per month and we get so many hours per month where they will work on our system. So that's an option. There's also the option for them to do billing through the area that they're in. But The typical setup is that the regional sewer district would have their own building, their own maintenance, all of that. They definitely will have their own board. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So I just want to make sure, but from what I'm understanding within the whole area, the current wastewater treatment facilities are capable of handling all of this, what you call regional district, correct?
So currently, they have extra capacity. Huntingburg will have extra capacity when they finish their expansion. They do not have enough, Jasper's treatment plant does not currently have enough capacity in their treatment plant to hook everybody else in the light blue area on and treat it.
That's what
So the way that works is if Jasper will say, right now we have X capacity, and say we end up just going, we get enough funding, we get a bunch of grant money, and we're able to do Hayesville and Portersville as a combined project together as the first physical construction project. At the time that we're looking at this design is when the engineering and the pre-engineering would actually take place of looking into that detail, how many capacity. We look at it and say, does Jasper's treatment plant have enough capacity? If it does not, and it needs an expansion, as part of the overall project of putting infrastructure in here, the regional sewer district would pay for a portion of the construction project that has to happen at Jasper's treatment plant, because you're taking my capacity. So, you're taking our flow. I'm gonna pay you to build the facility that you need to take our flow. Does that make sense? Right. Proportionally to the amount of capacity that they're using. Similarly, the likelihood, we've kind of looked in a little bit more detail into Hayesville because it is the #1 ranked project as far as priority. The likelihood that they'll have the collection system, will have a lift station on the edge of Hayesville, and then a force main. Our study shows for all of them, because it's conceptual, that you're gonna have a force main going straight to the treatment plant. The likelihood is that Hayesville will have a force main that'll come to the north end of Jasper's existing system. It'll actually have a flow meter there and tie into their system there. Jasper needs some more capacity on the north side of their system. So as part of that first project, we would be looking at putting a new large lift station on the north side of Jasper to help with the growth Jasper has and to take this flow here. And it would be in the system up here. In that case, the regional sewer district, if it's a 100,000 gallon lift station, okay? And the regional sewer district needs 50,000 gallons of that, and Jasper needs 50,000 gallons of that, then in essence, the cost of this lift station that's gonna be in Jasper would be split almost evenly between the initial infrastructure, between the county's funds and Jasper's funds to actually get it built. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, and so this is a longer term question now. So if the mid-stage corridor project goes in, and if we have the economic growth like the independent economic study that Dubois Strong did, and I know that's a ways off, but I mean, is that being looked at from a future perspective of what the capacity would potentially be needed and the costs associated with all of the expansion, I guess, that would be needed in the police facilities?
Again, we took it as in a conceptual manner. We looked at that, and I guess one of the biggest things to realize is that a lot of the kind of expected growth that the county would expect to come from the Mid-States Corridor project, if you don't have sewers, it's not gonna come. So it's kind of one of those catch-22s. In order for you to get the development, you also have to have the services to support that development. And roads not the only utility that you need. So absolutely looking at all that together. As far as that initial cost, which, one of the reasons why this concept has failed over and over and over again over the last several decades is being looked at as feasible is because it is so expensive to put in as much pipe as you need to put in to get these rural areas for as few houses as you have. And so when Jasper looks at it or Honeyburg looks at trying to serve, Duff and, whatever outside of their areas, they say, we can't validate the initial capital cost and what that adjustment is gonna be to all of our current users for the amount of additional users we're gonna get per mile of sewer line. And so it dies on the vine. The benefit to doing the regional sewer district is the regional sewer district has a lot more opportunity for free money. And the concept here is that we're estimating that about 50% of that initial capital cost is gonna be forgivable funds, grant of some sort. That's what makes this feasible, where it was not feasible for any of these areas to do it on their own. You're not having anywhere near the same level of debt service that the users are gonna have to absorb.
So this is gonna be absorbed by county money. Original.
Yes, but a mixture between, as far as the capital cost, a mixture between county funds, or county loan most likely, and then grant dollars through federal and state government.
So even if you're not benefiting from it and you're in the county, you're still paying for it.
Like I said, yes, everybody within the county will have
benefit.
an effect. You won't have a monthly bill, but yes, in effect, there will be expenses involved in that. No different than if they were to put a new road in or anything else. But you also have benefits that come with that because you have the economic growth in your county, just because it's not in your neighborhood that you have sewer available. The county can grow and develop as a whole, and as the county grows and develops, everybody within the county's property values go up. If you're one of the people that does have sewer, if you are one of the first groups to get built out and you have immediate sewer, your property value is gonna go up a whole lot faster because you now have sewer. But even those that still don't have sewer, but within the county, as the county's property value as a whole goes up, everybody goes up, just not at the same rate.
Along that line, first of all, any expansion out there would come from grant money, and then, as you pointed out, perhaps a loan from the county.
Mhm.
The actual cost or the actual payment would primarily be not from county taxpayers, but from the users.
Yes,
The
long
rate- the
term,
rate payer.
yes.
Long term, the rate payer. The county may use, nothing would prohibit the county from putting additional money in, I suppose. But the idea is just like in the city of Jasper or the city of Huntingburg, the ratepayers are the ones who are financing that utility. And the same would be true here for the most part. I can't guarantee what some future council might do, but for the most part, it's the ratepayers that finance it and not the taxpayers.
Well, we just did that study for Holland.
Right.
The topography is horrible between the two. I mean, it's not even feasible. The millions of dollars it costs us to get from Holland.
Right. And again,
I mean, we did look at it because it's reasonable.
but if you have to absorb 100% of that capital cost, it isn't feasible.
Right.
Which is why it's never been feasible for Jasper to take on Hayesville. But when we go, and as soon as we say it's regional and it's countywide, the amount of free money that becomes available for us to apply for, quadruples. It's just so much more opportunities are available so that you don't have to cover that capital investment 100%. You know, again, like I said, looking at this, where we got to where it gets to be feasible is when about 50% of that capital investment is forgivable funds. So not a loan, not county money, nothing that the residents here are paying for or the users are paying for. But yes, it would become a county department, just like, you know, Jasper's system is a city department, but they are properties within their legal sewer limits that aren't hooked onto their sewer. And there's lots, it was in Patoka's legal limits that don't have sewer available. So it would work the same way if you're within the county area that still doesn't have a sewer yet. Any other questions?
I guess I got one,
Yeah.
getting started here, we know that Hayesville is an issue, you brought it up a few times, but, so let's say, as a county, we try to get the whole system started. And so now you've got one small area, let's say going in, it's whatever it is, $11 million project, okay? So, I guess I see so many costs involved in the maintenance and service of that small area, to get started. How does that normally work? I mean, how does something like this get going, because we couldn't buy off a county, we couldn't buy off a $40 million project, So, I mean, if we've got a bad area in Hayesville, can you kind of scenarialize that for us?
So most likely, for instance, by the way, I would like to say the full report that does show you like how the rankings are done, what cities are ranked or what communities are ranked in what order, what those high level kind of conceptual costs are, comparison costs for that infrastructure and all of that. Will be on the city's website.
It's on the county website.
Or county website.
It's
Oh,
on
so
the
it's up
news.
there now?
Yeah,
Okay.
I put it up yesterday.
So it's on the county website and you can view it there as well. But so whether we're looking at just Hayesville or Hayesville and Portersville, where we're combining them or doing one, the first step is funding applications. And we'll go after as much funding as we possibly can. We already have started that process. We have already put in some applications for funding. So like I said, ideally we'll get 50% of it in funding of the capital cost. And then the other 50% would likely be low interest loan money. So it's a debt service, and as your ratepayers are paying in, you're paying your bill. So you don't have to come up with that all up front. No different than when you buy your house or any large capital investment. County would take a loan out to make that happen.
I guess could you touch then on service and maintenance, because, you were saying we would have to have somebody go out, if there's a breakdown of some type, would you subcontract that out at first to the city of Jack, somebody, or would you try to build the force like we have the county, county highway department, that takes care of the highway? So it's something that'd be tough to start up when you only got, a few, just say that portion of it.
So whenever you go after the municipal loan money for a project like this, the operation, they're not only looking at the capital costs you need, the operation and maintenance and what your rates are and your entire financial balance sheets are included in that funding package. So as far as being able to have funds to operate initially, that would be in with that loan package, not just the actual infrastructure would be in there. So that's how you kind of get it started. Initially, that would be up to the Regional Sewer District Board to decide, do we want to right away jump in head first, feet first, and hire a maintenance person, buy the billing software, do all of our own billing? Do we want to do all of those operations ourselves? Or do we want to, there are independent companies out there that have service plant within treatment plants all over the country that's all they do. Or do we want to have an agreement with Huntingburg, in addition to treating our sewer, do we want to have an operations and maintenance agreement with Huntingburg, Jasper, and Patoka, so that each area we can use, a portion of their existing staff and existing structure to make that happen. All of those options are on the table.
Well, thanks, that makes sense.
And the likelihood is it would be baby steps. We'd start, and then once there is enough users and infrastructure in the ground that it makes sense for them to actually have a full-time person, because we build out one and it's 5 years later before they can build the next community. You really don't have enough maintenance to do on a brand new system to keep a person full-time busy.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at.
Right, yes.
That's good.
Mhm,
Thanks for explaining that.
Has there been a survey done? Do most of Hayesville people want this? I mean, will they convert to sewer systems?
We did an online survey to get the feel for that. In this report, there is summaries on, who liked it, who didn't like it, what areas they live in that like it, don't like it, who wants it, all of those things. Overall, there is support for it. The biggest thing we notice is that, those people whose systems are working well are scared that it's going to affect them, and the answer is absolutely not. As long as your system is not an environmental issue, you never have to hook up to the county system. Unless the only time you'd have to do it if it wasn't an environmental issue is if, for instance, if we're looking at a restaurant, for instance, a business, if they decided they were going to do an expansion and they were going to double the size of their dining room, in that case, they'd have to double the size of their septic system as well. Once you go to where you have to do a major overhaul of your existing septic system, at that point, you would be required to hook on. But the reality is the cost to do that overhaul, most people are going to choose to hook on at that point because the cost to do that overhaul is significant.
Well, the reason I was asking, our neighbor road is like half and half. And, there is a cost for the people who did hook up. And I hope those people know it, because it's, it's a pretty significant amount.
Okay, no different than paying your water bill, be it versus being on a well. Having city water versus having well water. There's a lot of expense to keep your private infrastructure running as well. Long term, the public utilities are less expensive. But, you can go a long time sometimes with a private facility and not have hardly any expense. It's just when you do, it's a big hit at one time. The main driver for all of this is the environmental issues. The reality is that EPA, IDEM, which is Indiana's Department of EPA, the amount of E. coli, fecal matter that they are seeing in the White River and that they are seeing out there has been flagged and is noticed. And at some point, people whose systems aren't working at all, the EPA, not the county, the state item is gonna come in, and what they end up doing if you don't have public sewer to hook onto, and you don't have enough room to put in a mound system, it gets condemned, and basically your home is now a really expensive garage that you can't live in, because the state government won't allow you to have any, sewer services, you can't stay there. So that's the driving force behind all this. The reality is the county has no desire to be in the sewer business. You don't make money off the sewer. Nobody wants to be in the sewer business. And if there was any other option, I don't think any of you all would be doing this right now, really, but the reality is there's a need out there for the residents of the county. And unless there is a public option, some people don't have any other option. And like I said, getting to the point where when IDEM becomes aware of it, the consequences are significant unless you have another option.
I think that's a very fair statement. We've had this conversation multiple times. I don't want to spend money on wastewater. That's no fun. And the community people don't cheer when you put in a new sewer pipe. People like a new road in front of their house. That would be more probably exciting to the community. Getting internet to everybody's house, that's a little more exciting. We're working on that too, but it's one of those things that realistically, if the county health officers went out to these homes and probably tested each home, or if the state decides to do it, or the federal government, he's exactly right. I would assume that, I won't guess a percentage, but a high percentage of the existing systems, they don't meet today's standards, so we wouldn't let people build on as small of a lot as they have with as much waste going out as they have. But they would fail. And we're getting, I don't want to be in the business of doing what you said, condemning someone's home and making their home, that's not what this is about. But long-term, it is a health thing. There's waste going out. I've seen a home up there with a pipe that comes out of the back of their house, and you could literally see waste from the home coming out of the pipe. And within 20 yards, there's a creek. So you can't see it, it goes in the grass, but I would assume a portion of that goes in that creek. It's not fun. I'd rather spend the money on something else, but I think long-term for our county, it's gonna be an investment that has to be made. It's never going to be any cheaper than it is now. Everything's gonna be more next year, 2 years from now. And I look at it too, if you think of a major local builder, they're not gonna build, and Jasper sees this too, they're not gonna build if there's no sewer. I live on 500 North. If there was sewer out there and internet, it might be a good place for a subdivision. Until then, nobody's gonna go without the infrastructure. So if we're always looking at every community to thrive. You look at how many people are moving into your community. The people are what make your community strong and vibrant. That's the number one indicator. And if we give people housing options, that's another way that we can make sure that DuBois County continues to be strong. And unfortunately, this is one of those costs.
And we've also got these great little communities like Hayesville, like Portersville. And we don't see them die just because they can't, take care of their waste. So this is a way to hopefully save these communities and make them vibrant again, and give other people a chance to build there as well, and maybe their communities will grow, or maybe they just want to stay the same, but at least they can live in a healthy community.
And I want to make that, like you said, some people don't want whole ton of growth. One thing to notice when Chris looked at the population spot and looked at the different options for growth, one of the things he referred to is when we're talking about that continuing that same path that you all been on underneath 6 decades?
Yeah.
6 decades at 3% or 5%?
Yeah.
Something like that. We're not saying we're gonna put these sewers in and because you want all of this development and you want to become Indianapolis or New Albany. No, you live in Du Bois County because you like the character of Du Bois County. In order to continue that same rate of growth that you have been experiencing is where you need the sewers at this point, and is what that graph is showing, is that without that, you would not have the same rate of growth you have now, even. So we don't want to change the culture of your community and where you live either drastically, but to continue growth and vitalization, these areas need sewer. As an option.
If there's no other questions, we can, I'm sure the two presenters will hang around for a little bit. If you didn't want to talk publicly, you can try to grab one of them or grab one of the commissioners. We'll give everybody one last opportunity if they have anything else to say.
What's the next step, Mary?
So we're gonna do, because Hayesville, ranked so high, on the list, we're gonna do a question and answer session in January. In Hayesville, it'll be open to the entire county, everybody can come, but we wanted to, bring the opportunity directly to those that would be on that front end list, and in their community. So that's the next, item, and that will be January 18th. It's St. Paul Lutheran Church. And then, this next, big step for everything is to file the petition with IDEM to create the legal entity of the regional sewer district.
Will you send the email out for all them?
Excuse me?
Will you send an email out for the meetings?
Yes, for the January 18th meeting. Mhm. Yeah, we actually just finalized that date this morning, so it hasn't been advertised or anything like that, or really actually once I got here. But yes, that will go out to the shareholder, stakeholders email group, yes.
Probably said, is there a time on that? 6, 5:30?
5:30.
5:30.
Seeing no other business, we'll close the meeting.
Thank you guys so much for coming.
Good presentation.
Mike?
I don't know if it's-